My name is Nami Cho. I'm a senior attorney here at Volunteer Legal Advocates.
And my name is Maddie Glennie. I'm the Medical Legal Partnership Supervising Attorney here at Volunteer Legal Advocates, and we're really excited to talk with you today.
For today, our agenda will be that we'll introduce who we are, what our organization does. Then we'll start with what to expect with the interview. And then the next section will be how to prepare, whether you have an attorney or not. Finally, we'll speak about our clinics, where we have free clinics almost every day of the week, where you can come in and speak to a lawyer. I mean, this is a disclaimer, really, that at the clinic and even today, we'll be giving general legal information, but we won't be giving specific legal advice, and we won't be able to specifically tell you what you ought to do in your case. Neither will we do that at the clinic, but it is a space where you can come and ask questions, and we'll tell you a little bit more about it later. And at the end of this session, we also have a section where you can ask questions. We also have some questions you might have already submitted with Owl, and we can start by answering those.
Great, so now I will do a brief introduction about our organization, Volunteer Legal Advocates. So our vision as an organization is that a life free of violence and abuse is a basic human right. We advocate for survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence, as well as at-risk children and other vulnerable individuals through our comprehensive pro bono legal services that are in 3 different practice areas, including our domestic violence practice area for civil protection orders, custody, divorce, and immigration, which is what brings us here today. As well as our child advocacy practice, where we have attorneys who help children who are in contested custody cases. We empower victims, and we broaden our impact by training volunteer attorneys and community volunteers in these issue areas. For our immigration program, we are able to help survivors of gender-based violence and domestic violence specifically to navigate the immigration system. And I'm sure, as many of you know, the stakes are even higher in this area recently. We help remove barriers for these individuals and empower them to live and work without fear, and to hopefully get them status that helps them be protected in the United States. We have our various areas of within immigration law listed there, including VAWA self-petitions, U visas for victims of crime, T visas for victims of trafficking, helping asylum seekers who are fleeing gender-based persecution, as well as helping special immigrant juveniles, and then occasionally temporary protected status individuals and those who are seeking work authorization or adjusting status. So that's a background about some of the areas of law that we do. I'll turn it over to Nami.
Hi, so this section is affirmative asylum interviews, what to expect. And this is a picture of what you'll see in front of the asylum office. The Arlington Asylum Office is located at 1525 Wilson Boulevard, Suite 300 in Arlington. It's near the Rosslyn Metro. Recently, if you come to your interview date, you're not allowed to wait very long in the first floor lobby. You'll be going up to the 3rd floor. And what you can expect is a standard security checkpoint like you might have at getting into another federal building or an airport. You can only pass through that if your appointment is within 30 minutes. So we suggest still that you plan beforehand where you're going to meet your attorney and your family in that building, but to know that you ought to go a lot earlier than the 30 minutes. We'll talk about arrival timing in a couple of slides.
And one thing to flag is you should always check your interview notice for the specific address and office that you're going to. This presumes that you're going to the Arlington office, but you want to always double check your hearing notice or your interview notice.
Right. Reading the entire notice carefully is very important, because the notice can also change from what the information that we're sharing today is too. So this is what I see. All right. So this is what the room will look like if you go into your asylum interview. It will not be a courtroom. It'll look like a normal sort of bureaucratic, regular office room with a desk. The asylum officer will be on one side. You, your lawyer, your interpreter would be on the other side if you have them. The officer will be behind a computer monitor, may not look at you at all times, may be taking notes. Um, your attorney's role there, if you have one, is limited. Your attorney can be with you, can answer questions if asked by the asylum officer, can give a closing statement on why you should get asylum, and can take notes. But this is really your time to speak.
So as I mentioned before, you always want to double check your interview notice for the date, time, and address. We always recommend arriving around 2 hours early. It is a little frustrating with the limits on staying in the lobby, but getting in the area is important because you don't want to have an issue with traffic, with train delays. If you get lost, have a flat tire, things like that always happen at the worst of times. And even if you have a good reason, especially under this administration, getting a interview rescheduled is incredibly difficult. And so you really want to make sure you're there with extra time before your scheduled interview. The interview may start late or it might be rescheduled, especially if your interview is later in the day. It's more likely to be rescheduled because they might run out of officers that day. We often recommend if you're going to get rescheduled and you're really keen on having that interview go through the next time, picking an earlier time if they give you options. And every person who's listed as a derivative on your asylum application must be present for each interview appointment. And if you have young children, it's recommended to try to bring someone who can watch them during the interview, whether it be another derivative or another trusted adult. And the interview times can vary on how long they last. It can be really short, 1 hour up to 4 hours. I've had an interview go for 6 hours with an interpreter. And as you may know, having an interpreter doubles the amount of time because everyone's translating through another language. So street parking is not advisable in the area because the meters may run out while you're in your interview, and you don't want an added stressor of that. We consider using Spot Hero if you do need parking in the area, where you can book maybe for half a day or a whole day. So here are some things to make sure to bring to your appointment. You want to bring 2 full copies of your asylum application, the evidence, and any supplements. If you mailed in additional information, you want to have copies of that along with proof that the mail was received at the asylum office. You want to also have your passports and or other identification documents for yourself, for any derivatives, including spouse and children. And this is because they do check and scan your ID documents because they want to make sure that the person coming for the interview is who was sent the interview notice and who applied. If you have a Form I-94 record, you can bring that. It's good to bring original copies of birth certificates with the translations if needed, if they're available. Original marriage certificates, hard copies of the work permit, as well as the interpreter would need to bring an ID. And if you have an attorney, they need to bring an ID. And if you have an attorney, they need to bring the signed G28 form. And if you have gotten biometrics done and have a stamped copy of that, you should bring that, just covering all your bases. And then you need to bring your interview notice to show the office and the security why you are there. And another thing to keep in mind is that they might keep your ID throughout the interview because they want to scan it at the end. That's not abnormal, but it's good to, make sure that you have a picture of your ID beforehand as well. I'll turn it over to Nami.
Right. So we spoke about you bringing an interpreter, and so maybe you won't have an interpreter, but if you do not speak English, you really must. That interpreter must be someone who's at least 18 years old and needs to be fluent in both English and the language that you speak fluently. But it's your responsibility to bring one that's not provided for you unless you are deaf or hard of hearing. If you're deaf or hard of hearing, there's a way to request that, and you have to do that in advance. But please remember that the interpreter needs to be a non-interested party. So it cannot be your lawyer. It cannot be a witness testifying on behalf at the interview, or who might have submitted a statement on your behalf in your petition, in your packet. And then also it cannot be somebody who's a representative or employee of the government of your country. I'm not sure we talk about this in some of the slides, so maybe Maddie, I'll say a little bit more about that is if you think that you don't need an interpreter, but you're not positive, you really need to make a real honest assessment about it with somebody else who can give you maybe their opinion, because if it turns out that the asylum officer thinks that you need one, they can just cancel the appointment. They could just deny you or refer you to immigration court. So the consequences can be bad, or they can reschedule you as well, but there's a high risk. So if you're not sure, it's recommended that you bring an interpreter, and that can be hard to get. So thinking ahead and using your resources, asking for assistance. I don't know if AsylumWorks has advice on that, but that would be a good idea. Another important reminder is, that's there. There it is. That's the next slide. Okay. If the asylum officer determines that they can cancel or reschedule. The next thing is if you have an interpreter and you bring one, just know that the asylum officer will phone in somebody to monitor so that the interpretation is correct. And if you need to reschedule, as Maddie said, it could be far in the future and it can not be very successful. So we hope you can make that appointment.
And here are some things not to bring. So you don't want to bring any liquids other than water. They do allow you to bring water in, but you also don't want to bring any weapons or sharp objects. Even if you have like a permit for the weapon, you don't want to bring it because it's a government facility. Additionally, you don't want to bring a huge group of people, even though you might want the moral support. It's basically, it's a limited space. It's always really packed anyway, and they might have, judgment, and they might send away people that have too many individuals with them. And so those are some things to keep in mind. So when thinking about what to wear, you always want to try to err on the side of clean and professional clothing, basically like as if it was a job interview. And it does get really cold in there in the asylum interview offices. So bringing a layer is great, but it gets really, really warm in the waiting area because there's so many people. So having something you can take on and off is great so that you don't get uncomfortable more than this process already is. Turn it over to Nami.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about asylum interviews and how to prepare yourself in this time. Maybe you haven't gotten your interview scheduling notice yet and you're wondering what to do. Maybe you have one coming up. And so we're here to help you know how to prepare if you're on your own or even if you have a lawyer. So there's this is a way to sort of consider helping yourself. Remember to stay focused on what you're there for and what you're trying to answer for to the asylum officer, what they're trying to figure out. So I like to say your case is in your hands to empower you to know that there are things that you can do to prepare and to remember what you're there for, remember what asylum is, and how to tell your story so that it's focused and makes it hard for the asylum officer to say no. So the questions are, the things that you can try to remember are on your hands. What, we'll go to what. So what happened to you? What do you fear? What happened to your family or others like you? And what made the harm that you faced severe? What made it severe discrimination? What made it severe? What made it persecution? That's what the first thumb is you're trying to tell the story of what happened to you, what do you fear, and what makes it so extreme that it counts so that you should stay in this country. The second part of the asylum hand is who. It's up to you to describe to the asylum officer, who are you? What about you puts you in danger? Who are you known to be that makes you vulnerable to persecution? And you can give an example from your experience. The third finger is why. It's a really important one. I think we'll talk about this later in some of your questions. I think someone asked, what is one of the most common mistakes an applicant makes during the interview? And I think this why part is something that asylum seekers sometimes forget. Sometimes you're telling your story about all of the harm. Maybe you say what the harm is very, very clearly, but you have to say why, because asylum isn't given to everybody who experienced harm in their country or violence. You have to say why, because asylum has to be based on one of the 5 grounds that Maddie will tell you about, but you probably know, the harm must be related to your fear of persecution on account of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So the why is what I ask for you to try to remember to say is, why did this happen to you? What makes you think that you were targeted? What about you puts you at risk? And what characteristics do the people who are harmed share? The next part is was it the police? Was it the police or the government who threatened or harmed you? Because that is also another part of the asylum elements that you're going to have to prove, and the asylum officer will ask about. Was it someone the police could not or would not control? And why do you think this? Do you know people who try to report and get protection from the police or courts, and what happened to them? And the asylum officer will want you to say, did you try to report to the police or to the courts? And if you did not, why not? And then the last finger is another place. I wish it started with a W, but I guess it could be where. That could have been where, I suppose, is you have to prove that there was no other place within your country where you were safe in order to get asylum here. You're also going to have to prove that you were not firmly resettled in some other country on your way to the United States, where you could have found safety. So when you're telling your story, remember it's what, who, why, police, and where, which is the location. Why is relocation not reasonable? Why do you think that the person wanting to harm you can still harm you if you're here, right? Did you try to relocate? What happened? And did you find safety in another country?
And one thing to flag right now is that under the current administration, they are really hammering down on this element, especially if you traveled through other countries to get to the United States. They're expecting arguments about why those places you couldn't safely relocate, and why you can't be detained or deported to those other nations. So here's an overview of the requirements for asylum, which Nami already brought up, but here it all is in kind of one consolidated place. You want to show that you are afraid to return to your country of origin, because of persecution that happened to you in the past or persecution that you fear in the future. And you have to show that persecution was severe. It can't just be basic harassment. It has to meet a certain threshold. You also have to show that the harm was committed by the government. So the police or the police did it, or like the laws in the country make it illegal to be who you are, or that the government cannot or will not control the person who's doing the harm. And then lastly, you have to show that the harm was based on a particular ground, whether it be your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, your particular social group, and you can pick multiple categories if they apply. So if it is your political opinion and also your religion, you can mark both. You don't have to pick just one if both apply to you. You also have to show that you are not safe to return to any part of your country, and that you are not safe in a country that you traveled through, especially under this administration. That element is very important to meet. So one thing to think about is your elevator speech, and I want to give credit to NAMI for thinking of how to kind of pitch this to everyone. But you basically want to, when you are given the opportunity, your officer will likely ask you what brings you here to apply for asylum or something along those lines. And having reviewed your entire application, you want to be ready to say in a few sentences kind of your elevator speech that you would do at a job interview, where you want to be able to say, in a condensed way, why you were harmed, who harmed you, and those elements that NAMI already mentioned. And you want to highlight your fear as it relates to an asylum claim. And you don't have to get every detail in that first answer, because like I mentioned, some of the asylum interviews are incredibly long. You're going to have more opportunity. At the end, they should ask you if there's anything else you want to add, which you want to be very specific about what you add at the end. But if there is details like an assault or something that you didn't get to talk about, that is a time that you'll be able to say something. So you basically want to not focus on generalized crime or economic conditions as like the main reasons for your fear. You want to emphasize what your individual fears are, what threats or incidences you faced or others like you faced, and what makes you afraid to return, how severe these were, and why this happened to you specifically. And if you were hospitalized, if other things like that, you want to mention those important things because that highlights the severity of the harm. I'll turn it over to NAMI.
And we called it elevator speech because if you're in an elevator with somebody for, I don't know, 5, 6 floors going up or down, you're in that room and you don't have a lot of time. So sort of getting to the point of what you were going to say, that's what we mean by elevator speech, what you would say in 3 to 4 sentences. So this next slide is about how to prepare. So emotionally, how do you prepare for something like this when you're sharing your story with a stranger? It's an adversarial feeling process for sure, in a new room, and a lot's at stake. What we would recommend, if possible, if you can find the emotional resources and also find therapy maybe, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is try to maintain composure, even if the asylum officer is aggressive or adversarial. They may not be, they may be very friendly. There are a lot of different asylum officers and they might have different moods at different times of the day. But if it is adversarial, we do recommend trying to maintain a professional composure, of not escalating or feeling defensive and getting angry or aggressive back. That would be a recommendation. Try to still stay focused on your asylum claim. Try to feel grounded if you can. You know, if you're feeling worried or scared, maybe your therapist can help you with thinking of ways to see something, touch something, smell something, and remember to stay focused on why you're there. and what you're trying to share. We recommend that you listen carefully to each question. So a lot of times with any interview, controlling the pace, taking time to listen, to think, and to respond will help a person feel more in control. And we hope that you can have that. So listen carefully to what the question is. If you don't know what they're asking, it's much better to ask for a clarification. You're allowed to do that. And always to go in knowing that being honest is very, very important. Even if your answer is, I don't remember, that is an okay answer to give. And it's always better to do that than to make up an answer that you're not sure of. You're allowed to say, I don't remember. You're allowed to say, I don't know.
And also on pacing, if you have an interpreter, they may want you to pause after one or two sentences, and you don't want the interpreter to lose detail. Additionally, the officers will be usually taking notes, and sometimes they don't type as fast as the interpreter or you speak. So they typically will maybe ask you to pause. But if you're not done with what you were saying, you can always say, and I have more to say on that. I want to follow up on that. But just to flag, that's another thing that might happen with pacing.
Sometimes people ask, is it okay if I cry? And we would say maintaining professional composure is always good, but of course, crying is natural and a natural response. And it's okay to feel emotional. It's natural to feel stressed. But try to stay focused on telling your story. And like with anything else, the more you practice, and we'll talk about this later, hopefully that can help reduce your stress going in. But this could be a long process, or you might be talking about something that is difficult. And so you can ask for a break if needed. They will probably not give you a break unless asked. They will probably not want the break to be long, and they probably won't give more than one. So, but that's not always true. It could be more.
And another thing to flag is if you need a break for the bathroom, the only bathroom, they don't let applicants use the bathrooms in the back. So you have to use the bathroom up by the waiting room. So they'll bring you back out to the waiting room and then come back out to get you. So don't be surprised if you have to walk all the way back out to go to the bathroom.
So this is the slide about practicing. So even if your asylum interview is not scheduled, you can read your affidavit and your application regularly. Every question in that 589 of where you lived, where you went to school, who your parents were, how many siblings you have, what your date of birth is, all of those things. And also the affidavit, and also reading the affidavits that you might have submitted from your friends or family. Reading your application and affidavit every day for the 2 weeks before your interview may help give you confidence. If you have an attorney, they can help you practice. But if you don't have an attorney, if you have a trusted individual who can take your application and your affidavit and form questions and do a mock interview, a fake interview, pretending that they're the asylum officer, that can help.
And if you're reading your application every day and it's becoming too overwhelming and it's too much for you, you should always base it off of what your ability is and what is best for you. So if it's better for you to review it once or twice the day before, but then not review it in the weeks leading up, that's okay too. It's what works for you. But it's good to be familiar with the material.
And it's also good to be familiar with the material so that you can decide if you needed to supplement something or to describe a discrepancy from the beginning.
And you always want to double check your information. You can file a Freedom of Information Act request and get your entire immigration file. You can write entire A file, and you can review everything that's on file for you. The only issue with this recently has just been that there's been some challenges if they're too broad, and also with listing like with rejections for not listing addresses, even if they are included. So just be aware of that. If you have an attorney, you can discuss that option with them, or you can do it on your own. If there are mistakes in the past of any application that you've submitted, you want to make sure you inform your attorney, or if you don't have an attorney, you want to make sure you prepare something supplemental to give to the office with the correct information and also explaining why there was the error in the past. Recently, I think one of the questions was I think that was submitted was about the I-589 forms and what can be seen as an issue with them and how important they are versus when you do an interview. They are really important because that's the first document that the officer will review. Additionally, if it's not completed entirely, recently under this administration, there's been some issues with them deeming the application abandoned or basically saying that it's not sufficiently filled out and possibly referring to immigration court. So it's just good to make sure that it's completed, and that if it wasn't in the past, that you submit a corrected I-589. But make sure they note that it's the original date that you submitted, so you're not sent back to the back of the line. So Nami already mentioned this, but you may want to consider getting an ongoing relationship with a therapist to support you during this experience. It also can be helpful to get a psychological evaluation or a therapist letter to submit with your application, especially if it talks about the effect that the persecution had on you and still continues to have on you, or if it talks about why you can't maybe remember things as clearly because of trauma. So those are some things to keep in mind. And your therapist, like Nami mentioned, might have some good techniques of how to get through the interview when it's a really difficult process. I'll turn it over to Nami.
So we have the volunteer legal advocates. We have free legal clinics where you can come. You can call an intake line to schedule an appointment, or you can walk in without an appointment. We recommend that you come early so that you can get a space if, we have several people waiting. The last walk-ins are 30 minutes prior to close. I am at the AHF Healthcare Clinic on 1701 K Street on Mondays from 1:30 to 4. Maddie is at her clinic at 9:30 to 12:30 on Fridays at the Children's National Hospital Clinic in Columbia Heights. And then we have these other clinics as well, where you'll have immigration lawyers on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The Friday morning one is actually only family law. The one that's here on Friday from 10 to 1. Yeah, so we welcome you coming in, and you can bring your documents. We aren't your lawyers, so we can't give you specific legal advice, but we can talk to you about sort of creative ways for, say, if you are missing a certain document, we can give you a list of other forms of evidence that might be something that you do have that can help support a particular point in your asylum claim.
And one thing to flag for our Thursday clinic at the hospital, because of security, it's only for families of children in the hospital or the children themselves. But our other clinics are open for walk-ins.
So for the question slide, I wanted to let you know that we do welcome questions. We do have a 7 p.m. cutoff. And if you'd like, I can go ahead and sort of begin and look through some of the questions that you submitted, and Maddie and I can give you some of our answers. The first question was, what should applicants expect on the day of the interview? I believe we went through all of that. What is the role of the attorney? We went through that. We went through what weight does a written 589 carry? We did that one. So the most common mistakes applicants make during an interview, we would say would be talking about harm that's not related to a ground for asylum, such as focusing a lot on the general lawlessness in your country or the general crimes and, gang activity in your country. Another common mistake is not sharing details that support the severity of the harm and how it specifically impacted you. that's hard because sometimes you don't want to talk about how much it hurt you, and how bad the harm was. But it's your time to share that. It's what they need to know if they want to count it as persecution. I'm sorry. And then another common mistake is not sharing why it's reasonable for you to still fear the harm. So giving an example and answering who else like you was harmed, and why you fear it. That why it's reasonable, because that's something that the asylum officer is going to have to check off. They're going to have to say this is a reasonable fear of persecution. So another, yeah, go on.
One other thing with a common mistake, and also this affects the credibility question that people submitted, is if you have any arrests or any convictions, you want to make sure you disclose them already and bring the documents from the court that are certified, or from the whatever you have about that arrest or conviction, and then be prepared to explain why that happened. It's best to disclose it up front rather than have, because they do fingerprints and background checks, so they will likely find out about it. And if they think you haven't disclosed it on purpose, that affects credibility. And that's just another thing to bring with you to your appointment, is if you have any conviction documents or anything like that, or if there's also rehabilitation documents, you want to bring all of those documents with you.
The next question someone asked, I think we answered, was what level of detail is expected when describing past persecution or fear of future harm? Oh, well, I will say you should use as much detail as you can, but of course, if you don't remember specifically, it's better to say approximately in 2000 or around this time. Or we say, if you don't really remember, but you remember it was around when school started, you can say it was the end of summer, or it was the beginning of fall, or something like that, around Christmas. It was around Ethiopian New Year or Korean Lunar New Year or something like that. Someone asked, how are inconsistencies evaluated, especially minor or trauma-related ones? I do hate to say, but inconsistencies do affect credibility. Even minor ones can affect credibility. So knowing what's in your application is important. Supplementing it and explaining the discrepancies is normal. It's and something that you can do. And I think Maddie spoke to this point, which is your trauma-related inconsistencies, something that you didn't remember before you remember now, things like that, or you're not telling the story in exactly the same way. That can be at least explained a little bit by a therapist if there is a reason that the therapist found that might make you present with an inconsistency or a manner that would be that way. So. Another question was, how should applicants handle missing or unavailable documents? Our answer is, it depends on the document. And a lawyer can help with creative advocacy. And we recommend you find a lawyer if you can. And I'm sorry, it's so hard, I know. But if you can come to the clinic, we can give general assistance in thinking of other ways. Because we know that not everyone comes to the country bringing everything that they need that would show the best case.
And if you don't have documents because the government is refusing to issue them, if you have documentation of that policy, like if there's news articles about the government refusing to issue those things, that can be helpful. Just to give you hope that an officer has done research into your situation in your country, but you also want to kind of presume they haven't, and then have that documentation there. And so if the issuance of birth certificates is not even common in general in the country, but particularly for certain social groups, then explaining that, documenting it if you can, is just an example of what Nami was talking about.
Someone asked, what are the biggest red flags that harm credibility? We were thinking it would be biographical things in your 589 that you don't know. If it seems like you are not who you say you are, you don't know the identity of who you've presented. Also, if you speak about your asylum claim, why you fear persecution in a very general, very generic way that maybe everybody from your country says without any specifics about your harm, why specifically you, what about you, those specific details, then that's a red flag. That makes it seem that you're not, that the applicant is not telling the truth or telling a story that's theirs.
And as I said earlier, the credibility of if you don't disclose convictions, they will likely find out about them. And the fact that you didn't share it, and even if it happened after you applied, but before the interview, you want to disclose it because it can be seen as a credibility issue.
Someone asked about post-interview process and possible outcomes. And I think next time I'll make a slide on that because as you already know, post-interview decisions are on hold. I think you all know that. But if they were going, so I guess we won't go into how that's going to look because right now we don't know. But okay. But yeah.
It also changes a lot with the administration. So I've had asylum grants come in the mail without any notice ahead of time. It's just 3 weeks after the interview, we got the approval. I've also had in the mail. I've also had it where they make you come and pick it up in person and get the approval in person or the denial. And I've also had it where it took a really long time for it to come in the mail. And there was no pickup date for that. So it really depends on not only the federal administration's policies, but the administration's policies at that particular asylum office.
But your outcomes really are that you can be granted, or if the officer denies it, then you'd be referred to court where you have another chance, hopefully, to make your case. If you have another status already, then it would be a denial, but your work permit that was based on a pending asylum application, that would be canceled. But then you would not be referred to court if you had some other immigration relief that you already had. So does anyone have any other questions? We have about 12 more minutes.